In this episode, we're going to be talking about abandonment. Now, many Christians have unbelieving partners. Maybe you are the one that's saved and now you're a Christian and your partner hasn't come to faith yet. Maybe you were saved at one point in your life and you purposely married an unbeliever, hoping that God would eventually save them. Now, I would exercise caution there. It's not something I would advise. Remember Paul, when he's talking to widows who wanted to remarry, he said, only marry in the Lord. Nonetheless, in my experience, God in his grace and in his mercy has drawn many people in this way. And I want to emphasize this before I talk about anything else, that if your unbelieving spouse that you have now is willing to live with you, then you are to remain married and not divorce them. Remember, the unbelieving partner is sanctified through you, and who knows that God in his mercy and grace, like we've already spoken of, can bring them to faith, and it's your life, your character, your love for Jesus that will hopefully usher them into the kingdom. And I pray that would be the case. But I would say be committed even if your partner is not a believer, because that's God's intention for you. Now, with that said, if your unbelieving partner walks away from your marriage and you're not yet divorced, then pray that God would bring reconciliation. Look at my other episode for that. Now, if your unbelieving partner divorces you and still you have the opportunity of reconciliation, still pray that God would bring reconciliation. But if they remarry, then Paul gives us clear instructions that if that be the case, you are not bound anymore by that marriage. And the logic says that you will be free to marry because you're not bound by it anymore. And I want to emphasize again, this only applies when there's no chance of reconciliation in your marriage, because it's still a covenant and most probably there's children involved, and God wants to protect that marriage unit, especially in these days where children need it the most. So if your unbelieving partner walks away and remarries, you are free. You are not bound by that marriage anymore, and I would suggest that you are free to remarry. Now, what happens then if the person walking away is a Christian and they have completely abandoned you, divorced you, and remarried? Now, there's a lot of scholars and a lot of pastors who would suggest that the same thing applies. You have been abandoned. You're not the guilty party. You're the innocent party. Therefore, you are free to remarry. I would confess that if someone is willing to walk away from their own marriage and their own family and abandon them, I would question if that person really truly knows the Lord. But I would suggest that you make sure that you pray, that you seek the Lord and seek guidance from your church leadership on these matters to help you through this difficult process. And I pray that God would give you wisdom in the midst of this confusion and clarity so that you can move on to the next chapter of your life.